Secretary of Defense essentially saying it is time to move away from the era of big ground wars like Afghanistan, time to cut the U.S. military into a lean, mean team ready for 21st century war.
It would be a big change, rethinking America's military, our enemies, our wars, and how much we spend. On the chopping block, the number of America's soldiers, from a proposed 490,000 down to as low as 440,000. Watch America's forces spike during World War II, during Korea, Vietnam. These new cuts would see America with the fewest soldiers since before all of these wars. And in the skies, a 40-year-old aircraft, the A-10 Warthog, to be retired, to be replaced by newer aircraft, including the fearsome F-35 fighter jet. And the famed spy plane, the U-2, would be replaced by an unmanned drone. While at the same time, America will continue to invest in its special operations forces and cyber warfare.
We chose further reductions in troop strength in order to sustain our readiness and technological superiority.
But predicting the future of war is never a perfect science. Critics say the cuts signal a weakness and an opportunity to future enemies.
Talked about this for years. This is the inevitable process when you go down to the path of the ineffectual European state. Europe now is a collection of boutique countries. And the reason why is because of government programs that are being funded in part by cutting their military. This is exactly what you must do. As our government expands, as we've seen with Obamacare, how do you pay for that? Well, you shrink the military. So what you've got is this incredibly dependent society, and they can't defend themselves. That is not any way to preserve freedom. To preserve freedom, you got to have small government, big army, not big government, tiny army. This is the decline of the West that we've thought would come, and this is how it's going to be.
And I think we're not perceived as having the power that we once did. I think President Obama has a number of upcoming trips planned overseas for the rest of his tenure. What's he going to say? I'm wondering, what is he going to say? Is he going to say that I downsized the military? Is this why he's doing this now, so we can go around to the world and say, see, we're not as strong as we were before?
And actually, you're not just cutting the military. What you're actually cutting is military pay. You're cutting military benefits.
After 13 years of war, changes are coming to all branches of the military.
It is the Army that will take the biggest hit in terms of a smaller force, the smallest since before World War II, from 522,000 to 450,000. The National Guard will also be reduced by 20,000, and the Marine Corps reduced to a force of 182,000.
Sure.
For the Navy, the number of carriers will remain at 11, but the number of littoral combat ships will go from 52 to 32.
What do you think of these plans?
Well, I think they're inevitable because they're being forced by Congress. Congress has mandated substantial cuts through what they call sequestration. And this sequester has had devastating impact because it's across the board without any regard to the overall strategy. And I think what Secretary Hagel has done is to try and shape the forces to fit the president's strategy, national security strategy, which is the way it's supposed to be done, rather than just hacking a budget across the board, affecting everybody without regard to what the strategy or the missions are. So I think he's trying to make the best of a very difficult situation, but Congress, if they want to reduce the size of the national debt and the annual deficits, they have to be willing to belly up to the bar, so to speak, and pass the reductions.
And of course, there's a lot of criticism. I mean, I'm wondering what you think of this strategy, this change in approach, because a lot of people are saying that it's going to hurt the U.S.'s military readiness.
Well, the one thing that the Secretary is trying to do and the military is going to do is insist that readiness not be hurt. Namely, you can reduce the size of the force. You also will have to understand you have a higher risk on various missions, but you can reduce the size of the force, but you must do it in a way that protects readiness. That means training and equipping and making sure that the unit cohesion is solid so that you don't have a hollow force. And that's why these cuts are really tailored to make sure that readiness is not sacrificed. They will sacrifice modernization. Modernization will be delayed, and there will be other impacts. But if you're going to have a Congress that says we're going to cut across the board, forward, this is a better approach than what Congress has adopted. To look at this very carefully as you downsize to make sure you don't go below a certain level. When I was at the Pentagon, we had roughly 485,000 in the Army active duty. So they're planning to cut down to roughly 450. Some would take it down much further. When you start getting much further down than the 450, then you're running into a situation which I think you're compromising our security. But that's a decision that the President and the Congress working together will have to resolve, as well as the American people.
And I'm hearing very strongly that the U.S. is going to keep up its military readiness and that it will be able to get involved in battles overseas as well as protect its own interests. But I'm just wondering on a psychological level what message this downsizing is sending to the world, because the U.S. touts itself as the global police. But is it not stepping back in that role now?
Well, you have to also look at capability. And even though the size of the force may be coming down, the capability will be going up in terms of the modern systems that will be used. We also have to face the new cyber world, and this is something that hasn't been emphasized enough, that the capacity for state actors, to be sure, but non-state actors as well, to really attack our infrastructure, our ability to conduct business in this country, our ability to maintain our national defense capabilities. All of that is subject to attack today. And so the cyber defense, cyber modernization, cyber offensive capability is going to be very important moving forward. So I think the President is correct to raise this to a much higher level than it's been today, because most people are completely unaware of the tens of thousands of attacks that are taking place daily, stealing intellectual property to be sure, but also probing ways in which an opponent, be it state actor or non-state actor, could shut down critical elements of our ability to function as a society.
Just to go back finally to this ground troops, the replacement of ground troops with special forces and drones. I mean, this is making the US's role more anonymous, isn't it? And therefore slightly less reassuring.
I've always felt that it's important to have a physical presence. That when you're there physically, people see you, countries see you, they understand that you have someone, your men and women at risk along with them, and that is a major psychological advantage. When you are no longer visible, there's less reliance, less trust, less confidence.
I know President Obama is very grateful to these men and women who have spent an awful lot of time and the people that they represent in their services in putting this together. Today I'm announcing the key decisions that I have recommended to the President for the Defense Department's fiscal year 2015 budget and beyond. These recommendations will adapt and reshape our defense enterprise so that we can continue protecting this nation's security in an era of unprecedented uncertainty and change. As we end our combat mission in Afghanistan, this will be the first budget to fully reflect the transition DoD is making for after 13 years of war, the longest conflict in our nation's history. We are repositioning to focus on the strategic challenges and opportunities that will define our future. New technologies, new centers of power, and a world that is growing more volatile, more unpredictable, and in some instances more threatening to the United States. This defense strategy is focused on defending the homeland against all strategic threats, building security globally by projecting U.S. influence and deterring aggression, and remaining prepared to win decisively against any adversary should deterrence fail. To fulfill this strategy, DoD will continue to shift its operational focus and forces to the Asia-Pacific, sustain commitments to key allies and partners in the Middle East and Europe, maintain engagement in other regions, and continue to aggressively pursue global terrorist networks. Our reviews made two new realities very clear. First, the development and proliferation of more advanced military technologies by other nations. That means that we are entering an era where American dominance on the seas, in the skies, and in space can no longer be taken for granted. Given these realities, we must now adapt innovate, and make difficult decisions to ensure that our military remains ready and capable, maintaining its technological edge over all potential adversaries. However, as a consequence of large budget cuts, our future force will assume additional risks in certain areas. In crafting this package, we prioritize DoD's strategic interests and matched them to budget resources. This required a series of difficult choices. We chose further reductions in troop strength and force structure in every military service, active and reserve, in order to sustain our readiness and technological superiority, and to protect critical capabilities like special operations forces and cyber resources. We chose to terminate or delay some modernization programs to protect higher priorities in procurement, research, and development. And we chose to slow the growth of military compensation. Given these realities, we must now adapt, innovate, and make difficult decisions to ensure that our military remains ready and capable, maintaining its technological edge over all potential adversaries. However, as a consequence of large budget cuts, our future force will assume additional risks in certain areas. In crafting this package, we prioritize DoD's strategic interests and matched them to budget resources. This required a series of difficult choices. We chose further reductions in troop strength and force structure in every military service, active and reserve, in order to sustain our readiness and technological superiority, and to protect critical capabilities like special operations forces and cyber resources. We chose to terminate or delay some modernization programs to protect higher priorities in procurement, research, and development. And we chose to slow the growth of military compensation costs in ways that will preserve the quality of the all-volunteer force, but also free up critical funds needed for sustaining training, readiness, and modernization. Steep and abrupt automatic spending cuts were imposed on DoD and other agencies across the government under the mechanism of sequestration. Defense spending remains significantly below what the President requested in his fiscal year 2014 budget request and 5-year budget plan. The reason we are requesting this increase over sequestration levels is because the President and I would never recommend a budget that compromises our national security. Continued sequestration cuts would compromise our national security both for the short and long term. Sequestration requires cuts so deep, so abrupt, so quickly that we cannot shrink the size of our military fast enough. In the short term, the only way to implement sequestration is to sharply reduce spending on readiness and modernization, which would almost certainly result in a hollow force, one that is not ready, one that it is not capable of fulfilling assigned missions. In the longer term, after trimming the military enough to restore readiness and modernization, the resulting force would be too small to fully execute the President's defense strategy. The President's fiscal year 2015 budget offers a more deliberate and far more responsible approach that protects readiness and modernization, while maintaining a force large enough to fulfill our defense strategy, though with some risk for some missions. This plan balances the need to protect our national security with the need to be realistic about future budget levels.
I want to ask you about this whole budget is built around whether or not sequestration will continue beyond 2015. Of course, Defense Secretary giving us the numbers here of how that may change, of whether we decide to make cuts now as a nation, as Congress, or whether or not those will be imposed upon the military branches and personnel cuts through sequestration. Can you break that down a little bit?
Well, he basically laid out that there is some risk in terms of the reductions that he's laid out today. He thinks is doable, but he says that if you move beyond that, that kind of a situation where the United States has to move into an extended occupation, what they call stability operation here, depending on, or if there's another force that comes on, a potential further conflict, then that could be risky.